Hi everyone, it's Kerry back with you today. What I have here are some faux vintage wooden spools. Now this is a project that's been on my crafty bucket list for a long time, so the other night I just decided to get on with it. And I had so much positive feedback about these and people asking how I made them. So in today's video I'm going to show you how you can make these yourself using a kit or using items that you will have at home. And I'm also going to tell you how you can get hold of the free digital printable so you can print some out at home and make some as well. So the free digital printable is available in our shop. There'll be a link in the description box where you can pop along and grab this. Comes in these lovely vintage colours, or you can get a black and white one for colouring yourself. So in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to assemble the wooden spools that are available in our kit in our shop. I'm also going to show you how you can make something very similar using items that you have around your house. And we do also have some white chipboard circles available in the shop for those of you that don't have access to a circle punch. To assemble the wooden spool from the kit, I suggest you do it first without applying any adhesive. So you take these two pieces and they just slot together like so. And then one disc will fit on one end and the other disc will fit on the other end. And that's essentially your spool put together. But to make sure it doesn't come apart, it's better to use a little bit of adhesive. So I'm just using art glitter glue, and I'm just going to run a small bead on each side of the little spool slots. You don't need much. Then I'm just going to slot those together like that. Just wipe off any big dobs of glue. And then I'll take the circle. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue inside that slot. Then inserting this tab into the slot. Just wipe off that extra glue. And then the same on the other end. Make sure it's pushed firmly together. And then just set it aside to dry. And once it's dry, it's pretty rigid. So to make the spool out of items that you might already have at home, you're going to need some kind of cardboard or cardstock. You could use a cereal box or something like that. Today I'm just using some off-cut chipboard that I have, and I'm going to punch 6 circles. So I've got my 6 circles here, and I'm going to glue 3 of them together, which will give me a thicker end for my spool. I'm just going to use some art glitter glue. And then I'm going to leave those aside to dry. Whilst they're drying, what I have here are just some scripts of off-cut paper, and I've cut these at 5 centimetres wide, so that means that my spool will be 5 centimetres wide here. If you want one that's longer, then you need to cut your strips wider, or if you want it shorter, then you cut them smaller. And then I'm taking just one piece of paper, and this is just 80 GSM copy paper. You can use anything. And I'm just going to snip the end off into a point, because I find it a lot easier to roll a point than to try to roll one big square end. And I just sort of get it started a little bit, and then I take like a paintbrush or a pencil or something like that and just roll it. Now it doesn't matter if it's crooked, like you can see this is becoming very, very crooked. You're just getting a curl in the paper at this point, so that when I pull it off the paintbrush, the paper is already curled. So then I can push it down with my fingers and make it straight and pull it quite firmly. And then I just keep rolling it round and around in my fingers because it's actually making it smaller the more I roll it round. And it's getting tighter. So then I'll take a little bit of glue, slightly unroll the end. Just going to use glue stick for this. And then roll it so that it adheres down onto the roll. Okay, so it's looking like this. Now that's still pretty flimsy, so I'm going to roll several layers of paper around this to give me strength and also give me a bit more thickness for my spool. So that's pretty nice and firm and tight now. Now if you look on the very end, it's not 100% flat. So I've got a little craft hammer and I make sure that it's on a flat surface, and then I just give it a couple of little taps just to flatten that down. And then I do the same on the other end, and that way if you've got any bits that are sticking up a little bit more than others, they're not going to interfere with you gluing this spool part to your ends. You've got a nice flat surface there to still glue onto. So if you want to make your spool a little bit more decorative, you can wrap one final layer of book page or pretty paper or something around your spool, and that just gives it a bit of a different look when it's finished. So I've got my two spool ends here, and I want to make them look a little bit more smooth along the edges here, and also to sort of look a little bit distressed at the same time. So I'm going to use, this is actually it's a tool supposed to be for your feet, like, you know, the rough skin on your feet, but I like to use it for crafting. I don't use it on my feet, just to be clear. And it's just like a little sanding roller. So I'm just going to use that to roughly go over the edges of my spool. It just distresses it a little bit, but it also smooths out, you know, the rough or the sharp corners, I should say. You could use a sanding block just the same. I just find this is a bit easier. So now I've got my two end pieces nicely distressed. I've got my spool here, and I'm going to take a little bit of distress ink. I'm just going to add a little bit of colour on the ends of my spool. And around the edges of these pieces. So now it's just a matter of gluing these into the centres of these discs. Now I'm just going to eyeball it because I'm not that fussed about whether it's 100% in the middle or not. So I'm just going to take some art glitter glue and apply it quite liberally to the end of the disc there, at the end of the spool there. Just eyeballing that, looks about right. Pressing it down, and I sort of give it a bit of a twist because I think it helps get that glue in between some of those rolls of paper. Close enough. Then I'll do the same for the top. So then I'll just take the printable and decide which colour I want to use. Now there are 3 different sizes on the printable, but if you have punched out sizes that don't match the sizes that are here, you can always go into your printer settings and reduce the percentage size of the print. So for example, this one I've printed at 100% and you can see it's taking up most of the page, but this one I've printed at 80%, so it gives me the same images but just a smaller version. So if you're unsure how to do that, there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube showing you how to do that, and it might be different depending on what sort of computer you have. But for today, I think I'm going to use this size, and I think that might be the 1 3/8 inch. So lining up my circle. And not quite long enough. So I'll pop that one on one end. Just a little bit of ink around the edge. So there we go, little faux vintage spool. So I would let it dry completely before I wrap my threads or ribbon or whatever around it, just so the glue doesn't attach itself to your ribbon. To get this sort of vintage look using the wooden spool, what I have done is I've taken a piece of vintage ledger paper and I've measured roughly the size and then I've rolled it a little bit just to get the paper to curl for me. So now the paper's curling, and then I've glued the paper to one of these flat edges on the inside of the spool. Now you might need to let this part dry before you try to keep curling it around, otherwise it might peel up off the wood. Just going to use a paintbrush to make sure that's glued down properly. And then I'm going to encourage it around the inside. And then apply glue again. Just keep rolling. Then I coated the whole reel with some gesso, and I wasn't very fussy about how it was applied. Like I wanted it to be a little bit uneven in places and a few paintbrush marks and that sort of thing. Making sure to get the edges as well. And a light coat over the ledger page. So a very rough application there, and then I leave that aside to dry. Once my spool was dry, I went back in with my distressing sanding tool and did the same that I did to the homemade one, just roughly going over it in places to take off a little bit of the paint. And then I went around the edges with some distress ink. And I punched out my labels and glued those on, and that's given me a sort of nice shabby vintage look on that one. Once your spools are completely dry, you can wrap anything that you like around them. So I've also been using the little Printable to punch out some of the smaller spool tops and just make these little fabric embellishments. So these are just a few bits of fabric scraps from my scrap box with one of the small spools stapled into the middle, and I think they came out really cute too. I think that I might even use some of these with the faux French vintage fabric labels that I made last week. I think that looks super cute. Anyway, don't forget to pop over to the shop, grab yourself the free Printable. We've also got a couple of other freebies in the shop as well, so you might want to grab those while you're there. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Bye.